It was a calm night in the city, the kind of night when the streets glowed under soft yellow lights and most people were already at home, watching TV or winding down after a long day. A cool breeze moved gently through the trees as a tall man walked toward a sleek black SUV parked by the side of the road. He wore a gray hoodie and loose jogging pants, his hands in his pockets, humming softly to himself as he searched for something in his car. He had just finished a late dinner with a few friends from the charity foundation he supported. They had spent the evening planning their next community event for kids, something he cared about deeply. He smiled quietly as he thought about it, patting his pockets, trying to find his car keys. They must have slipped somewhere inside. Across the street, a police cruiser slowed down. Inside sat a young officer named Cole. He had been on the night shift for 6 months and took his job seriously. Maybe too seriously sometimes. He had received a call about a suspicious person walking near cars in the area. He didn't know much more than that. Cole turned his car toward the parked SUV, narrowing his eyes. It was late. The man looked tall and athletic but was wearing a hoodie pulled up over his head. Cole's training told him to check it out, so he switched on his headlights, pulled to the side, and stepped out. The tall man looked up, squinting a little against the bright light. "Evening, officer," he said calmly. Cole's hand rested near his flashlight as he spoke. "Evening. What are you doing out here this late?" The man tilted his head slightly, polite but puzzled. "I'm just trying to find my keys. Must have dropped them in the car." Cole glanced at the SUV, a luxury model, clean, expensive looking. Something about it made him suspicious. He had seen stolen cars like that before. "This your car?" he asked. "Yes," the man said, still calm. "I just had dinner nearby. I can show you my ID if you like." Cole nodded but kept his voice firm. "Please do." The man sighed softly, reaching into his pocket, moving slowly and clearly. He handed over his wallet and waited as Cole inspected it. The officer frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. The photo matched, the registration was clean, but something still gnawed at him. "You live around here?" Cole asked. "No," the man replied, trying to stay patient. "I'm in town for months had passed since the national summit, but the ripple effect of their journey continued to spread. Videos of their talks had made their way online, not because they wanted attention, but because people had filmed and shared them out of genuine inspiration. Clips of the officer and the NBA star talking about forgiveness, unity and understanding were being replayed in schools, shared on community pages, and even discussed in police training programs. It wasn't about fame. It was about change, quiet, steady change that was taking root in people's hearts. One morning, the NBA star woke up to an email from a small-town police chief. The message was simple. "Your story changed the way my department sees our community. We're starting something new. Thank you for showing us what humility looks like." He sat staring at the screen for a long moment, feeling something deep in his chest. Not pride. Exactly, but gratitude. Later that day, he called the officer. "Hey," he said, "I think we've started something real." The officer laughed softly. "Looks like it. Guess we can't stop now." They decided to organize a final event for the year, one that would bring together everyone they had met along the way. Coaches, kids, parents, police officers, teachers, all in one place. The goal wasn't to celebrate themselves, but to celebrate what they had built together. The venue they chose was a large community center in Chicago, a city that had seen its share of pain and division, but was also full of resilience and hope. When the day came, people arrived from all over the country. The gym buzzed with energy, laughter, chatter, the squeak of shoes on polished floors. There were banners with the words, "Understanding starts with listening," hung on the walls. Volunteers set up tables with food. Others arranged basketballs, and in one corner, a local band tuned their instruments, ready to play soft music between speeches. The NBA star stood by the entrance, greeting people as they came in. Many of them had stories to share. Stories about how a conversation, a school visit, or a single sentence had changed their outlook on life. A young woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "My little brother used to be afraid of cops," she said. "After hearing your story, he wants to become one, so he can make a difference." He smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. "That's what it's all about," he said gently. Across the room, the officer was talking with a group of community leaders. He wasn't in uniform this time, just wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He looked relaxed, lighter somehow. When the NBA star joined him, The two shared a brief nod, a quiet moment of mutual respect. The event began with a few short speeches. One came from a high school student who had attended their talk months earlier. She spoke about how she had learned not to judge others too quickly, how she had started volunteering at a local youth center, and how she believed in the power of small actions. Then it was the officer's turn to speak. He walked up to the microphone slowly, looked out at the crowd, and took a deep breath. When I first met the man standing beside me, he began, I saw what I expected to see, not who he was. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Not as shame, but as a lesson. The room was silent. Every face was turned toward him. I used to think wearing this badge meant I understood people, but I've learned that understanding doesn't come from authority. It comes from humility. It comes from listening. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. We can't fix every mistake, but we can take responsibility for the ones we make, and that's what I've tried to do. When he stepped back, the applause was gentle but heartfelt. The NBA star followed. His voice was calm, his words steady. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, he said. It's about freeing yourself from what could hold you back. I forgave because I wanted to move forward, not just for me but for everyone watching. He looked toward the officer, and I'm grateful that he chose to walk forward too. People stood up. The applause this time grew louder, not out of excitement but out of respect. After the speeches, the two led a friendly basketball game. Kids versus adults, officers versus volunteers. The gym was filled with laughter, playful shouts, and the sound of bouncing basketballs. It didn't matter who won. It was about being together, sharing the court, and remembering that everyone on it was human. During a short break, the officer sat on the bench beside the NBA star, both catching their breath. The sunlight streamed through the high windows, lighting up dust particles that floated gently in the air. Feels different, doesn't it? The officer said quietly. The NBA star nodded. Yeah, feels like peace. They watched as a little boy ran across the court, dribbling clumsily before throwing the ball toward the hoop. It hit the rim, bounced off, and rolled their way. The NBA star picked it up and tossed it back with a grin. You've got the form, he said to the kid. The boy smiled shyly and ran off again. That simple moment, a shared laugh, a tossed basketball, a sense of calm, captured everything they had been working for. Later that evening, as the event wrapped up, people began to leave with smiles, hugs, and handshakes. The gym slowly emptied, leaving behind echoes of laughter and the faint sound of music playing over the speakers. The officer and the NBA star stayed behind again, as they often did. They helped fold up chairs and gather stray water bottles, talking quietly as they worked. You know, the officer said, I used to think this kind of change needed big speeches or big moves. Turns out it just needs small things, like a conversation, a handshake, a game of basketball. The NBA star nodded. Yeah, change doesn't shout, it whispers. But if enough people listen, it gets louder. They both smiled, tired but fulfilled. As they walked outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint sounds of the city. Car horns in the distance, laughter from a nearby park, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The street lights glowed softly, casting long shadows on the pavement. They stood for a while, just watching the lights, the people, the life moving around them. I used to think the world was too broken to fix, the officer said quietly. The NBA star looked at him. It's not about fixing everything. It's about doing your part, making one piece a little better. The officer smiled faintly. I guess we did that. The NBA star nodded. Yeah, and maybe, just maybe, someone else will keep it going. A car pulled up to the curb, their ride back to the hotel. Before getting in, they shook hands one last time that night. But it wasn't just a handshake. It was a promise. To keep going, to keep showing up, to keep proving that understanding was possible. As the car drove away, both of them looked out at the city. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was alive, and in small corners of it things were changing, quietly, beautifully, one conversation at a time. In the weeks that followed, the community center kept the program alive. They held weekly games, inviting local police officers to play alongside teenagers from the neighborhood. They called it Courts for Change, just like the initiative the NBA star and officer had started. Photos of those games began spreading online, smiling faces, high fives, and unity in motion. The officer and NBA star would see them and smile, knowing that what they began had become bigger than themselves. One day, the NBA star was walking through an airport when a little boy ran up to him holding a basketball. "Are you the guy from that video?" The boy asked, eyes wide. He laughed. "Yeah, I guess I am." The boy grinned. "I liked when you said forgiveness is strength. I told that to my sister when she got mad at me." The NBA star's heart warmed. "That's good advice," he said. "Keep spreading it." He watched as the boy ran back to his parents, waving excitedly. It was a small moment, but it reminded him why every talk, every long day, every emotional memory was worth it. As for the officer, he continued to train new recruits, always starting his sessions the same way. He'd write one word on the whiteboard: respect. Then he'd turn to the class and say, "If you forget everything else I tell you, remember this. Respect doesn't start with a badge. It starts with being human," and in that, he found peace. Two men who began on opposite sides of a misunderstanding had built something real, something that didn't erase the past but transformed it into a foundation for something better. Their story wasn't about fame or forgiveness alone. It was about what happens when people choose to see each other clearly, without bias, without fear, without judgment. Because sometimes, one mistake can become the beginning of something extraordinary, and that's exactly what they proved. Not with words, but with the quiet strength of understanding, the kind of change that lasts long after the cameras are gone, echoing softly in every heart willing to listen. Work. I'm here often, though. Cole looked at him again. Work, huh? What kind of work? The man gave a small, polite smile. Basketball. Cole raised an eyebrow. Basketball? Like coaching? Something like that, the man said softly, not wanting to sound proud. Cole didn't notice the hesitation. He was too focused on his duty. You said you dropped your keys. Where are they now? The man stepped slightly to the side, pointing at the car seat. Probably there. I was about to check when you came over. Cole nodded but didn't move away. The silence grew heavy. The man could feel the unease thickening between them. A few cars passed, slowing down for a second to see what was happening. The streetlight flickered above them. Inside, the man felt a quiet ache. He had been through this before, stopped for no reason other than how he looked, questioned as if he didn't belong. It was something he thought he had escaped once his face was known to millions. But here he was again in the middle of an empty street, being seen only as a suspicious man. Sir, Cole said, breaking his thoughts, I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle while I take a closer look. The man blinked, surprised. You want to search my car? It's just procedure, Cole said, his tone firm but not harsh. We've had reports in this area. The man nodded slowly, though frustration began to show in his eyes. He stepped back, hands visible, calm as ever. Go ahead, officer. But please be careful. I'd like to get home soon. Cole nodded again and walked to the car window, shining his flashlight inside. The interior was spotless, a gym bag, a basketball, and a pair of sneakers on the passenger seat. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, Cole lingered. The man stood silently watching. Across the street, an older woman peeked through her curtains. Two teenagers walked by, whispering. What's going on? One of them said. Looks like someone's getting stopped. Cole moved around to the other side, checking the plates again, double-checking the registration. It all matched. He couldn't find anything wrong. But instead of relief, he felt embarrassment rising. Maybe he jumped too quickly. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. Officer, the man said quietly. Is everything all right? Cole turned toward him, the question pulling him out of his thoughts. Yeah, just routine. The man gave a small smile. Routine seems to find me often. Cole hesitated. What's that supposed to mean? It means, the man said softly, that this isn't the first time I've been mistaken for someone I'm not. Something in his voice made Cole pause. There was no anger, just a deep tiredness, the kind that came from too many moments like this. Before Cole could respond, a voice called from across the street. Wait a minute, Emma, is that who I think it is? Cole turned startled as a man stepped out of a nearby diner holding a phone. You're him, the man shouted, waving. You're that player. You play for the Lakers, right? The officer blinked, turning back to the man beside the SUV. He looked again. The height, the build, the familiar face now clearly visible under the streetlight. Suddenly it all made sense. The man gave a small, almost embarrassed nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's me." Cole's mouth went dry. He had watched this man on TV countless times, dunking, smiling, speaking to kids about chasing dreams. And now here he was being treated like a suspect. "Oh," Cole said, lowering his flashlight. I didn't realize." "It's okay," the man interrupted gently. "You were doing." The next morning started quietly, but the weight of the night before lingered in both men's minds. The NBA star woke up early, his body still tired from practice the day before, but his mind replayed the same scene over and over. The flashing lights, the questions, the way the officer looked at him before realizing who he was. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking out at the sunrise through wide glass windows. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a teammate or a friend. It was his publicist asking if everything was okay. Somehow word had spread that something had happened. Maybe someone who saw the stop posted online. Maybe one of the people passing by recorded it. He rubbed his forehead, unsure how to respond. He didn't want to make it a big story. He wasn't angry. He didn't want people attacking the officer or turning it into another heated argument online. But deep inside, he knew silence wouldn't fix anything either. He typed a simple reply. "I'll explain later. Let's not make this public yet." Then he put his phone down and leaned back. His heart was heavy, not because he'd been stopped, but because it reminded him that fame couldn't protect him from misunderstanding. He had worked hard to build a life that inspired others. He ran youth camps, helped kids from poor neighborhoods, and told them to believe that people could change. Yet moments like this made him question how much change had really happened. On the other side of the city, Officer Cole woke up feeling just as uneasy. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's face, calm, patient, and disappointed. He wasn't angry or rude, just tired. That made it worse. Cole poured himself a cup of coffee, staring at his badge lying on the kitchen counter. He had joined the force to do good, to protect people, to make a difference. But last night he had let his own fear and assumptions guide him. He hadn't treated that man with respect. He had treated him like a suspect. His partner, an older officer, called to check in. "Rough night?" Cole nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. "Yeah, I guess. I stopped someone who turned out to be, well, someone pretty well known." His partner chuckled. "Happens sometimes. Just part of the job." Cole didn't laugh. "Yeah, but it shouldn't happen like that. I made him feel like a criminal for no reason." The line went quiet for a moment. Then the older officer said, "You did what you thought was right at the time. That's all you can do." But Cole wasn't convinced. He hung up and sat quietly for a while, staring at the city map on his wall. He didn't want to just move on. He wanted to make it right. Meanwhile, the NBA star decided to clear his head by going to the community center where he usually practiced. It was early, so the gym was empty. He dribbled the ball a few times, the sound echoing through the space, steady and calm. Basketball had always been his peace. When the world felt heavy, the court was where he could breathe again. He thought about the kids who looked up to him, how many of them had told him about being judged, followed in stores, or stopped for no reason. He had told them to stay calm, to stay respectful, to rise above it. Now he realized how hard that really was. As he practiced free throws, the door opened and his friend, the center's director, walked in. "Hey, you're here early," the man said, surprised. "Yeah," he replied, bouncing the ball slowly. "Couldn't sleep." The director studied his face for a second. "Something happen?" He hesitated. "Got stopped by a cop last night. Thought I was breaking into my own car." The director frowned. "You serious?" "Yeah. He didn't know who I was until someone pointed it out." The man shook his head. "That's messed up. You should report it," he sighed. "I don't want to make it worse. I don't want this to become another headline about race or fame or police. But it's real," the director said. "If you don't say something, people will never know what this feels like, even for someone like you." The NBA star bounced the ball again, lost in thought. Maybe his friend was right, but he didn't want to embarrass the officer. He didn't want to fuel anger. What he wanted was understanding, a real conversation. Later that day, he had a meeting with his charity board downtown. As he drove, he noticed people glancing at his car, some waving. He smiled, trying to shake off the heaviness. When he walked into the meeting room, everyone greeted him warmly. "Big game next week," one of them said. "You ready?" He nodded. "Yeah, but I've been thinking, maybe after the season ends, we should do something new. Something about awareness. Maybe workshops with local police and kids. You know, just to build trust." Everyone looked at him curiously. "That's an interesting idea," one woman said. "What made you think of that?" He paused for a second. "Let's just say I had an experience last night that reminded me how easy it is for people to misunderstand each other." They nodded, sensing the seriousness in his voice but not pressing for details. As the meeting went on, his idea grew stronger in his mind. Maybe he couldn't change the world overnight, but he could start with one small step, creating a space where officers and young people could see each other differently. The next few weeks after the event were a blur of conversations, interviews, and quiet reflection for both the NBA star and the officer. What had started as a tense misunderstanding had somehow turned into a movement, something that neither of them had planned, but both felt deeply connected to. The Courts for Change event had made local news. Videos showed kids laughing with police officers, people from different backgrounds talking openly, and a message spreading that change could come from empathy rather than anger. The NBA star hadn't expected the attention. He just wanted to start a small conversation. But now people were calling it a new way forward. One morning he sat in his living room with his cup of tea, scrolling through messages on his phone. There were hundreds of them, from fans, parents, even officers from other cities. One message stood out. It was from a mother who said her teenage son used to be afraid of the police, but now wanted to join the youth basketball program after watching the event online. The NBA star smiled softly. That one message made everything worth it. But even with all the positivity, he knew there was still a long way to go. Some people thought he had gone too easy on the officer. Others thought he shouldn't have talked about it at all. Everyone had an opinion. Still, he stayed focused on what mattered, building understanding one small moment at a time. Meanwhile, Officer Cole's life had changed too. The event had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't expected. He had started volunteering at the community center every weekend, coaching kids and joining local discussions about how police could serve communities better. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, not just enforcing the law but helping rebuild trust. At first, some people looked at him with suspicion. They remembered what had happened. But over time, his sincerity began to show. He listened more, talked less, and worked hard to understand the people he served. One afternoon, as Cole was helping clean up after basketball practice, one of the boys came up to him and asked, "Officer, were you really the one who stopped him that night?" Cole hesitated for a second. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I was." The boy looked at him curiously. "Were you scared?" Cole nodded. "A little. Not of him, really, but of being wrong. And I was wrong that night." The boy thought about that and then smiled. "But you fixed it, right?" Cole smiled back. "I'm trying to." That small conversation stuck with him. It reminded him that people didn't expect perfection. They just wanted honesty and effort. Across town, the NBA star was preparing for one of the biggest games of the season. Reporters filled the locker room before practice asking questions not just about basketball, but about the Courts for Change project. "Do you think it's making a difference?" one reporter asked. He paused before answering. "I think it's starting something," he said. "And sometimes that's enough. One conversation can change how people see each other." The reporter scribbled notes, but he wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about how far one moment, one misunderstanding, had come. Later that week, the mayor's office reached out. They wanted to recognize both him and Officer Cole for their efforts in promoting unity. The invitation surprised him, but he accepted. He didn't want praise. He wanted to show that change was possible when people were willing to listen. The ceremony was held in the city hall, a modest but beautiful building with tall windows and a crowd that filled every seat. There were police officers, community leaders, kids from the basketball camp, and even a few teammates who had come to support him. The NBA star arrived quietly, shaking hands with familiar faces. He spotted Cole across the room, standing nervously near the stage. Their eyes met and they exchanged a nod. No words needed. When it was time for them to speak, the mayor introduced them, saying, "In a world that often focuses on conflict, these two men showed us what understanding can look like." The NBA star stepped up to the microphone first. He took a deep breath and looked around at the crowd. "I didn't plan any of this," he began. "I just wanted to go home that night. But sometimes the moments we don't plan end up teaching us the most." He told the story simply, without anger or blame. He talked about how easy it was for fear to cloud judgment and how important it was to replace that fear with connection. "We can't fix everything overnight," he said, "but we can start by seeing each other as people first. Not labels, not assumptions, just people." The crowd listened silently. When he finished, the applause was soft but genuine. Then it was Cole's turn. His voice shook at first. "That night," he said, "I thought I was doing my job. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't seeing the whole person in front of me. I was seeing what I was afraid of. And that's not what an officer should be." He paused, looking over at the NBA star. He had every reason to be angry. But instead, he gave me a chance to understand. And that changed my life. When he stepped away from the podium, the applause was louder this time. Not for what had happened, but for the honesty it took to admit it. After the event, people came up to shake their hands, thank them, and share their own stories. Parents talked about their children. Officers talked about how they had started volunteering in community programs. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the crowd began to leave, Cole and the NBA star walked outside together. The sky was turning pink with sunset, and the air was cool and calm. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" Cole asked, half smiling. The man shook his head. "Not in a million years. But maybe it needed to happen." They walked quietly for a moment, listening to the sound of the city around them. Cars passing, people laughing, the soft hum of life going on. Cole broke the silence again. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we should take this further. Bring the program to other cities. We could work with local departments, schools, maybe even other athletes." The NBA star turned to him, surprised. "You'd want to do that?" The next chapter in their story began quietly, without cameras or headlines. After months of traveling from one city to another, the NBA star and Officer Cole had become unlikely partners in something much bigger than either of them had ever imagined. Everywhere they went, people were curious. Some were hopeful, others skeptical, but most were simply surprised to see a police officer and a man who once had every reason to dislike him. Working side by side, they had already visited 6 cities, each with its own set of challenges and stories. In every community, the same pattern repeated. Hesitant introductions at first, guarded conversations, and then slowly, as the games and talks unfolded, barriers began to fall. One afternoon, they arrived in a small town outside Atlanta. It was one of those quiet places where everyone knew everyone. The local gym was old but full of character. Faded paint on the walls, worn wooden floors, and banners that told stories of past championships. As the NBA star stepped inside, a group of kids immediately recognized him. Their eyes lit up, and one of them whispered loudly, "That's him." He smiled and waved. "You guys ready to play?" They nodded eagerly, some bouncing basketballs, others just staring in awe. Officer Cole followed behind, carrying a box of jerseys. He handed them out with a smile, and though a few parents in the stands still looked cautious, there was a sense of curiosity in the air, a willingness to listen, to see what this was all about. The first game began, filled with laughter, missed shots, and a few impressive plays. But the real magic wasn't in the basketball itself. It was in what happened after. When the game ended, Cole and the NBA star sat with the kids and their parents in a circle on the floor. They talked about respect, about fear, and about how assumptions could hurt people. One teenage boy spoke up. "My brother got stopped once just for walking home late," he said quietly.
"He didn't do anything wrong." Cole looked at him with a serious but gentle expression.
"I know," he said softly, "and I'm sorry things like that happen. I used to think being cautious meant being safe, but sometimes it just means not seeing clearly." The boy nodded slowly. His mother, sitting beside him, wiped her eyes. The NBA star listened carefully to every story that followed, stories about fear, frustration, and hope. Then he said something that stuck with everyone in the room. "I can't change what's already happened," he said, But I can help change what happens next. Every time we talk like this, every time we choose to understand instead of assume, we're making that change. That night, after everyone had left, Cole and the NBA star stayed behind to help clean up the gym. The floor squeaked under their shoes as they swept, the sound echoing softly. Cole glanced at the man and said, "You ever think this would become your life?" He smiled. "Not at all. But I'm glad it did." They worked in silence for a while before Cole spoke again. "You know what's strange? Before that night, I thought I understood everything about being an officer. Now I realize I barely understood people at all." The NBA star leaned on his broom and looked at him. "Understand? Ending people, that's the hardest part. But it's also the most important." Cole nodded, taking that in. The next morning, they were scheduled to visit a local high school. The principal had asked them to speak to the seniors about leadership, choices, and perception. When they arrived, the auditorium was full. Hundreds of students whispered among themselves, unsure what to expect. The principal introduced them briefly and handed the microphone to the NBA star. He didn't start with a speech. Instead, he started with a story. He talked about the night everything changed, how fear had turned a simple misunderstanding into something much bigger. But he didn't focus on blame. He focused on what came after, the decision to listen instead of hate, to build instead of break. Then Cole took the stage. The students went quiet as he spoke. "The hardest part of being human," he said, "is admitting when you're wrong. I made a mistake once, one that could have destroyed someone's trust forever. But instead of walking away, he gave me a chance to do better. And I took it." There was a pause. Then slowly the students began to clap. Not a loud, flashy applause, just a sincere, steady rhythm that filled the room. Afterward, a group of students gathered around them, asking questions. Some were about basketball, others about police work, but many were about life. How to deal with anger, how to forgive, how to stand up for what's right. One girl asked quietly, "Do you ever get tired of talking about that night?" The NBA star smiled gently. "Sometimes. But then I remember what came out of it. If it helps even one person, it's worth talking about." Cole nodded beside him. "Yeah, it's not about reliving the past. It's about learning from it." Over time, the tour grew. Media began covering their events again, though they both tried to keep things low-key. It wasn't about fame. It was about consistency. Every gym, every school, every neighborhood meeting mattered. One weekend, they were invited to a national youth summit in Washington, D.C. The event was larger than anything they'd done before. Thousands of young people from across the country. When they stepped onto the stage, the room buzzed with energy. The NBA star looked around and said, "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be standing here because of something that went wrong, I wouldn't have believed it. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes life uses the hardest moments to teach us the most important lessons." Cole followed with his own message. "We all make mistakes," he said. "But what defines us isn't the mistake itself. It's what we do after. I was wrong. I let fear make my decision for me. But now every day I choose understanding instead." The applause was overwhelming. But even in that huge crowd, they both stayed grounded. They knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. That night after the event, they sat together in the hotel lobby, tired but content. The city lights shimmered through the windows and the low murmur of voices filled the room. Cole leaned back in his chair and said, "Do you ever think about that first night? The one where it all started?" The NBA star nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think about it a lot. Not with anger anymore, though, more like gratitude." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Gratitude," he smiled. "Yeah, because without it, we wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have changed. I wouldn't have found this purpose." It's strange, isn't it? How something bad can lead to something good. Cole nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, life's funny that way." For a while they sat quietly, each lost in thought. Then Cole said, "You know what I've realized? Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself move forward." The NBA star looked at him and said softly, "That's true. And sometimes forgiving someone helps them become who they were meant to be." The next morning, as they boarded their flight home, they were both quiet. Looking out the window, the NBA star saw clouds stretch endlessly beneath them, soft, peaceful, infinite. He thought about all the people they had met, all the lives that had been touched, and how a single moment had created a ripple that kept spreading. Back home, when he returned to practice, his teammates welcomed him with open arms. One of them patted him on the back and said, "Man, you've been changing the world out there," he laughed. "Just trying to change one mind at a time." As for Cole, he returned to his department with a new sense of purpose. He began training younger officers, sharing his experience openly. He didn't hide his mistake. He used it as a lesson. At the end of one of his sessions, a rookie officer asked him, "Do you really think people can change how they see each other?" Cole smiled. "They can, but it takes work. It takes listening, humility, and a lot of courage." He paused, then added, "But yeah, they can." Weeks later, Cole and the NBA star met again for another Courts for Change event. As they stood side by side watching the kids play, the sound of sneakers on the floor echoed through the gym. The NBA star turned to Cole and said, "You ever think this might outlive us?" Cole looked at him and smiled. "I hope it does." They didn't need to say more. They both knew what they had built. Something that started with a mistake but had grown into a symbol of what understanding and compassion could achieve. As the day went on, laughter filled the gym again. Kids ran up and down the court, parents cheered, and for a while everything felt simple. Human. When the event ended, the NBA star stood at half court looking around the gym. He saw faces full of hope, trust, and new beginnings. It reminded him that the world, despite its flaws, still had room for growth. He picked up a ball and tossed it toward Cole, who caught it easily. "Still got your hands?" he teased. Cole laughed. "Always." They both smiled, not as strangers anymore, but as friends, as brothers, as proof that sometimes the hardest lessons bring out the best in people. And in that quiet moment, the past no longer mattered. Only the future did. Cole nodded. "Yeah, I've learned more from this than any training I've ever had. People need to see that change is possible." The man smiled. "Then let's do it." Over the next few months, they did exactly that. Courts for Change became a traveling program, visiting schools and community centers across the state. They held basketball games, open talks, and workshops that brought together people who had never spoken to each other before. Everywhere they went, they met new stories. A young boy who wanted to be a cop because he wanted to protect his neighborhood. A retired officer who said he wished this kind of program existed years ago. A single mother who cried as she thanked them for giving her teenage son hope again. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about rebuilding faith in people, showing that respect and empathy could heal old wounds. The NBA star often thought about how strange life could be. A moment of fear had turned into a lifelong mission. He had been stopped in the dark one night, but that darkness had led him, and others, to the light of understanding. One evening, after a long day of events, he and Cole sat in a quiet gym in another small town. The floor was empty, the lights soft. The man tossed a basketball lightly toward Cole. "Still got your shot?" he teased. Cole laughed, catching the ball. "Maybe not as good as yours, but I'll try." They played for a few minutes, laughing like old friends. It wasn't about winning. It was about connection. About two people who had found something rare in today's world: forgiveness, respect, and purpose. Afterward, as they sat on the bleachers catching their breath, Cole said quietly, "You know, I used to think being a cop was about control. Now I think it's about understanding." The NBA star nodded. "And I used to think being a public figure was about performance. Now I think it's about responsibility." They sat in silence for a while, the echo of the bouncing ball still fading. Outside, the night sky was calm. Streetlights glowed softly, and somewhere in the distance the faint sound of laughter filled the air. Both men knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be misunderstanding, still be fear, still be mistakes. But now they also knew that one act of humility, one honest conversation could start something powerful. The NBA star stood up, stretching his arms. "You ready for the next city?" Cole smiled, grabbing his jacket. "Always." They walked out of the gym together, two men from different worlds, now walking side by side, proving that change begins not with anger, but with courage. And as the doors closed behind them, the court stayed quiet. But the message they carried kept spreading far beyond its walls. A message that one night, one choice, and one moment of compassion can rewrite a story that once began with misunderstanding. That evening, while he was driving home, his phone rang again. It was the same number as the night before, the police department. He hesitated but answered. "Hello?" "Good evening, sir," a voice said nervously. "This is Officer Cole. We met last night." The NBA star's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, but he kept his tone calm. "Yes, I remember. I just wanted to call and apologize again," Cole said. "I've been thinking about it all day. I realize I shouldn't have assumed anything. I'm sorry for how I handled it." There was silence for a moment. Then the man said softly, "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it." "I don't expect forgiveness," Cole continued, his voice sincere. "But if there's anything I can do, even just to understand better, I'd like to." The NBA star thought for a moment, then said, "Actually, maybe there is something." He explained the idea he had been thinking about, an event to bring police officers and young people together for a basketball day, something fun but meaningful, something that would start conversations instead of arguments. Cole listened quietly, surprised. "You really want to do that?" "Yes," the man said simply. "We can't fix what happened last night, but maybe we can prevent the next one." Cole nodded slowly. "I'd like to help, really." "Good," the man replied. "Let's talk soon." When the call ended, both men sat in silence, feeling something they hadn't expected. Relief. Maybe something good could come out of a bad moment. The next few days moved quickly. The NBA star talked to his charity board about hosting the event. They agreed to sponsor it. The local police department also approved the idea after Cole brought it up. They decided to call it Courts for Change. News spread fast, but this time for the right reason. The story wasn't about conflict or anger. It was about connection. At the community center, kids lined up to play alongside officers. There was laughter, friendly competition, and conversations that wouldn't have happened anywhere else. The NBA star stood on the sidelines, smiling, watching as barriers began to fade. Officer Cole was there too, helping organize the games. At one point, he and the NBA star stood side by side, watching two teams, one of officers, one of kids, play a close match. Cole turned to him and said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't just walk away that night." The man smiled. "Me too. Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most." The crowd cheered as a young boy made a perfect shot. Both men clapped and laughed. The tension of that night was gone, replaced by something lighter, respect. As the sun set behind the gym, the NBA star took a moment to look around. The kids were happy. The officers were relaxed. For the first time in a long time, he felt like things could really get better. He knew the world wasn't perfect. He knew mistakes would still happen. But that evening proved one thing. Change doesn't start with anger. It starts with understanding. And as the crowd began to leave, Cole approached him one last time. "Thank you for giving me a chance to learn from this," he said. The man nodded. "Thank you for wanting to learn." They shook hands, and not as a star and an officer. Not as symbols of two sides, but simply as two men who had chosen to listen. And that handshake, quiet and simple, meant more than any headline could ever say. "Your job." Cole swallowed hard, guilt twisting in his chest. "Still, I shouldn't have." The man raised a hand slightly. "It's fine, officer. I've been through worse. Can I go now?" Cole nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, of course. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." The man gave a faint smile, not out of forgiveness, but out of weariness. "Take care," he said, getting into his car. As the SUV drove away, Cole stood there, frozen under the streetlight. The night was quiet again, but his thoughts were loud. He felt a knot in his stomach that wouldn't go away. He walked back to his cruiser, sat down, and stared at the dashboard. His reflection in the windshield looked back at him, full of regret. He replayed the moment again and again. The calm tone in the man's voice, the look in his eyes when he said, "Routine finds me often." Cole hadn't meant to offend. But deep down he knew it wasn't just a simple mistake. He had looked at a man and assumed the worst. And that realization hit harder than any punishment could. That night, as the city lights dimmed and the roads emptied, Cole sat in silence, thinking about how quickly he had judged and how easily it could have gone wrong. Meanwhile, across town, the NBA star drove home, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. His heart ached, not from anger, but from exhaustion. He had spent years building his name, his image, his reputation, only to be reduced again to a suspicious person under a streetlight. As he pulled into his driveway, he sat for a moment, letting out a long sigh. His phone buzzed, a message from one of his teammates checking in. He smiled faintly, typing back, "Yeah, I'm good. Just tired." But deep inside, he knew something had to change. He wasn't angry at the officer, not really. But he couldn't let the moment pass quietly. Maybe this was a chance to turn something uncomfortable into something meaningful. And as the night faded into dawn, both men, one in a patrol car, one in a mansion, lay awake thinking about the same thing. How easy it was for people to see only what they expected, not who someone truly was.